So, Donald Trump's private Boeing 757, the gold-plated symbol of his empire, the plane he's flown for decades, is sitting on a tarmac right now, and it's not going anywhere. A federal judge just issued an emergency order grounding that aircraft as part of a sweeping asset freeze that's hitting Trump's global holdings. We're talking properties, bank accounts, investment portfolios, all of it locked down while courts sort through what could be the most devastating financial ruling of his life. And here's the kicker. Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha himself, just went on CNBC and said something that should make every investor in America sit up straight. He called this the most predictable financial collapse I've seen in my career. It's honestly hard to believe we're watching this unfold in real time. This isn't just about one man's legal troubles anymore. We're talking about a reckoning that could reshape American business, politics, and the very concept of accountability for the powerful. And, trust me, what happens in the next few weeks could determine whether our institutions can still function when tested by someone who spent decades bending every rule to his advantage. Let me fill you in on what's been happening behind the scenes. So, Donald Trump, the guy who built his entire identity on being a billionaire dealmaker, who slapped his name in gold letters on everything from casinos to steaks to a fake university. The man who rode down that escalator in 2015, promising he was too rich to be bought, too successful to fail. For decades, Trump has operated in this grey zone between aggressive business tactics and outright fraud, always managing to stay one step ahead of consequences through lawsuits, settlements, and bankruptcy loopholes. Whether it was the Trump Foundation getting shut down for self-deing, Trump University settling for $25 million after defrauding students, or the Trump Organization getting convicted of tax fraud. He really cemented himself as someone who could weather any financial storm through sheer force of will and an army of lawyers. His whole brand was built on this image of untouchable wealth. But here's where things get interesting. We're now 3 weeks into what legal experts are calling the most comprehensive asset preservation order ever issued against a former president. Trump's real estate holdings are frozen. His investment accounts are inaccessible. His business operations are under court-appointed monitors. This mess is unfolding because New York Attorney General Letitia James won a civil fraud judgment for $454 million, and Trump's appeals have been systematically rejected at every level. The appellate division upheld it. His emergency motions got denied. His requests for stays were turned down flat. And guess who's stuck right in the middle? Yep, Donald Trump watching his empire get locked down piece by piece. He's supposed to be this master negotiator, right? The guy who wrote The Art of the Deal. But here's the kicker. The courts aren't interested in his negotiating tactics. They want the money. They want accountability. They want adherence to the law. And before we go any further, let's be real for a second. Nobody's shedding tears for a guy who inflated his net worth by billions to get better loan terms while deflating property values to dodge taxes. This is about whether someone can commit massive fraud and just walk away because they're famous and rich. Now back to the matter at hand. Reports from around October 28th revealed just how panicked Trump's legal team was getting. Judge Arthur Engoron, who presided over the fraud trial, labeled Trump's latest appeal attempt as frivolous, and even went as far as to say it showed a disturbing pattern of delay tactics designed to frustrate legitimate creditors. Talk about strong words. Essentially, the judge was calling Trump a fraud artist for trying to hide assets, while claiming he couldn't possibly come up with the bond money. And this wasn't a private conversation. Judge Engoron made sure to air his concerns publicly, in a written order, making it clear that he was not buying Trump's Poverty Act for a second. This announcement sent shockwaves through financial circles because it raised all sorts of questions. If Trump, the self-proclaimed multi-billionaire, couldn't post a bond without claiming financial hardship, What did that mean for everyone who'd been taking his word about his net worth for decades? Was the whole thing a house of cards? Now, this isn't the first time we've seen this pattern. Trump's loyalty really only extends to himself. And whenever institutions stop bending to his will or people stop being useful, he turns on them with a vengeance. We've spotted this pattern time and time again. Just think about how he turned on Jeff Sessions right after the Attorney General recused himself from the Russia investigation. Sessions had been one of Trump's earliest and most loyal supporters, the first senator to endorse him. But the moment Sessions followed Department of Justice ethics rules and stepped aside from overseeing the Russia probe, Trump publicly humiliated him, called him weak, and eventually forced him out. Sessions' reward for years of loyalty, public degradation, and a destroyed reputation. Then there was Bill Barr. Trump wasn't pleased when his hand-picked Attorney General refused to go along with election fraud conspiracy theories after the 2020 vote. Barr had carried water for Trump through the Mueller report, through impeachment, through countless controversies. He twisted himself into pretzels, defending Trump's conduct. But when Barr stated the obvious truth that there was no evidence of widespread election fraud, Trump turned on him instantly, calling him weak and disloyal. Barr resigned rather than continue the charade, but not before Trump had already moved on to finding more compliant enablers. And let's not forget how he distanced himself from Mike Pence when his own vice president refused to overturn the 2020 election results on January 6th. Pence had been the ultimate loyal soldier for 4 years, defending every Trump scandal, standing by during every crisis, never breaking ranks publicly. His reward, a mob chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," while Trump watched on television and did nothing for hours. Even Kevin McCarthy faced a similar fate when the former speaker couldn't deliver on Trump's impossible demands. McCarthy had gravelled, had gone to Mar-a-Lago after January 6th to make amends, had defended Trump through everything. But the moment he couldn't control his caucus completely, Trump withdrew support and McCarthy got ousted. Now it looks like our entire legal and financial system is in the hot seat. This pattern is becoming all too familiar. Institutions can bend over backwards trying to accommodate Trump, can give him every benefit of the doubt, can extend deadline after deadline. But the moment they actually enforce the law or refuse to grant him special treatment, he attacks them as biased and corrupt. You can show all the difference in the world and treat him with kid gloves every single day, but the moment you hold him accountable or cease to be useful, he'll tear you apart without a second thought. So what did Trump do to trigger this massive asset freeze? Well, it all boils down to a simple principle. If you lose a civil fraud case and get hit with a $454 million judgment, you need to post a bond while you appeal. Otherwise, the state can start seizing your assets to satisfy the debt. The impasse happened because Trump claimed he couldn't possibly secure a bond that large, while simultaneously insisting he's worth billions. New York was trying to protect taxpayers and fraud victims by requiring the standard legal bond, while Trump was attempting to get special treatment through endless appeals and delay tactics. Ultimately, properties just sat there with liens attached, since no one was willing to bend the rules. As the defendant in a massive fraud case, Trump decided to take a defiant stance. He filed emergency appeals and refused to acknowledge the legitimacy of the judgment. His approach seemed to be just drag everything out, claim persecution, and hope something breaks his way politically. At first, some conservative legal commentators seem to be on board with this idea. They appreciate fighting spirit and the notion of standing up to what Trump calls political prosecution. But here's where things started to go wrong. But as the appeals dragged into their third week, some serious issues started cropping up. Asset valuations were dropping. Insurance companies were backing away from the bond question. And international banking partners were getting nervous about their exposure. While Trump's team were steadfast in claiming persecution, predictably the financial markets began to shift their assessment of Trump Organization's solvency. Reports indicated that major banks were increasingly concerned about their loans to Trump properties potentially being underwater. This was the moment financial institutions began to sweat a little. You see, banks value stability, predictability, and above all, legal compliance. They don't want to be tied to a fraud judgment that's triggering asset seizures across multiple jurisdictions. That's definitely not the partnership they signed up for. And then Trump went ahead and made a move that, according to financial analysts, was a serious misstep. Trump started looking for ways to avoid the bond requirement altogether and figured he should just get the appeals court to waive it based on financial hardship. He even considered selling off properties at fire sale prices or bringing in foreign investors with questionable backgrounds. But then when Judge Engoron caught wind of all this, he absolutely lost it. In the judge's eyes, claiming poverty while owning billions in real estate is just a transparent attempt to game the system. Trying to offshore assets, that's evidence of bad faith that could justify even harsher penalties. Any defendant who dares to hide assets while appealing a fraud verdict is instantly labeled a flight risk engaged in ongoing, fraudulent conduct. Now, this left Trump in a tight spot. On one side, he really needs to maintain the billionaire image to sustain his political brand and business empire. His entire identity depends on being perceived as fabulously wealthy and successful. The MAGA base will start questioning his competence if he admits he can't come up with $500 million. On the flip side, he actually has to comply with basic legal requirements that apply to every other defendant in America. That means either posting the bond through legitimate channels, accepting the asset freeze, or starting to liquidate holdings to pay the judgment. The tricky part is, all of that requires some level of transparency about his actual net worth and honest dealing with financial institutions, courts, and the public. So Trump is caught in a bind. He can either keep trying to maintain the illusion of unlimited wealth, which means continuing to fight the bond requirement, and that only makes the legal situation worse and paints him as someone actively evading legitimate court orders. Or he can do what every other fraud defendant has to do in America, which means admitting his actual financial situation, working with the court-appointed monitor, and accepting that, yes, consequences actually apply to him too. But that'll definitely destroy the mythology he's built his entire career on. It's a tough situation, and that's the mess Trump creates for himself, with decades of inflated claims. He demands total belief in his wealth and wants everyone to accept his valuations without question, but then he points fingers at the system when reality catches up. He's not shy about claiming persecution whenever accountability arrives. This whole scenario is causing major stress within financial and political circles. If Trump's wealth was always overstated and courts are now calling his bluff, every bank that extended him credit, every investor who partnered with him, every political donor who bought into the billionaire myth is left wondering what else was fabricated. Those moderate Republicans who are trying to balance supporting Trump politically while maintaining their own credibility are now worried sick about being associated with what looks increasingly like a massive, decades-long con. Meanwhile, the MAGA hardliners believe the entire legal system is corrupt and that Trump's being persecuted for political reasons, and they're digging in harder, regardless of evidence. Things became even more intense when Deutsche Bank, one of Trump's longest-standing financial partners, quietly began reviewing their entire relationship with Trump Organization entities. They'd been pushing for distance anyway after January 6th, but now they're actively exploring how to minimize exposure. When a major international bank that stuck with Trump through countless scandals starts quietly backing away, you know you're in a world of hurt. The legal action came swiftly and decisively. On October 26th, New York Attorney General Letitia James filed an emergency motion in the appellate court stating that Trump's continued delay tactics and asset shuffling were clear violations of court orders and potentially criminal conduct. She pointed out that the New York State Constitution and appellate rules require defendants to post bond or face asset seizure. No exceptions, regardless of wealth or political position. Her filing included evidence that Trump had been moving money between entities, had approached foreign nationals about loans, and had threatened to put properties into trusts beyond the court's reach. That's not the behavior of someone planning to comply. That's someone actively preparing to defraud creditors. The legal process moved pretty quickly, and Judge Barbara Kapnick, overseeing the enforcement proceedings, recognized the urgency. After all, every day Trump continues shuffling assets means those assets become harder to recover if he ultimately loses his appeals. And let me tell you, Judge Kapnick didn't hold back with the ruling. It was a major blow for Trump. The judge declared that Trump's actions were constitutionally indefensible. Attempts to place himself above the legal standards that govern every other New York resident. That's legal speak for saying, you've got no solid ground to stand on here. There's no legal validity to what you're doing. You're just abusing the appellate process to delay consequences you know are coming. A sitting New York judge calling out Trump by name for constitutional violations created a real stir. It's a significant move, reminding him that he isn't above the fundamental principle that judgments must be satisfied. This is a huge deal that doesn't usually happen in functioning democracies. When judges start using phrases like placing himself above the law, they're not being dramatic. They're documenting for the record that they've witnessed something genuinely dangerous to the legal system. Legal experts are noting that we haven't seen an asset freeze this comprehensive against a major political figure since Ferdinand Marcos. Andrew Weissman, a former federal prosecutor who's prosecuted mob bosses and corporate fraudsters, went on MSNBC and made a statement that really should catch everyone's attention. He said that any competent attorney would have told Trump that trying to avoid a bond through delay tactics and asset hiding was going to backfire catastrophically. The courts have seen every trick in the book, and trying to play games with a fraud judgment is basically begging for criminal contempt charges on top of everything else. Just think about that for a moment. A prosecutor who took down Enron executives and Gambino family members is saying Trump's legal strategy is worse than what organized crime figures attempt. And this is coming from someone who understands how white-collar criminals think and operate. Joyce Vance, a former U.S. attorney and current law professor, mentioned that the combination of a massive civil fraud judgment, documented asset hiding, and defiant public statements creates the worst possible situation for a defendant. Any one of those things is serious. All three together, that's when prosecutors start thinking about criminal charges for obstruction and contempt. When legal experts from both prosecution and defense backgrounds start tossing around terms like criminal exposure and obstruction, that's the moment to really pay attention. So, let's break down what this showdown could mean, because it's not just a captivating legal story. It has serious consequences for how our financial system and democracy operates. First up is the immediate political fallout. Trump is already facing significant backlash due to his 4 criminal indictments, and his approval ratings among independent voters are tanking. Republican candidates in swing districts are getting anxious about the 2024 elections, which is definitely adding to the tension. Now, add billionaire who can't post $500 million in bond money to the narrative. And honestly, that's not the best look for him. Most folks in America have a good deal of respect for the courts as a vital part of our system, even if they don't always agree with specific rulings. Watching Trump openly defy court orders while claiming he's being persecuted isn't playing well outside his hardcore base. Democrats are definitely planning to take advantage of this situation. They'll argue that Trump believes he's above the law and does not hold basic legal accountability in high regard, and they'll have Judge Kapnick's ruling backing up those claims. This is going to be Exhibit A in proving that Trump thinks rules only apply to other people. You can expect to see clips of Trump's gold-plated jet sitting grounded on a tarmac, popping up in Democratic campaign ads, speeches, and debates. The visual metaphor is just too perfect. The symbol of his supposed success literally going nowhere because he couldn't follow the law. Now, let's touch on what this means for the financial system itself. Federal regulators have been working hard to keep politics out of banking oversight, wanting the system to be viewed as above partisan influence. But by taking this aggressive enforcement action, they've waded right into a political controversy. Trump and his supporters are now poised to attack everyone involved, implying bias and questioning motives, which complicates things for financial institutions, trying to maintain their image as neutral entities, dealing only in facts and numbers. Yet banks and regulators probably felt they had no other choice. If they stayed silent while Trump shuffled assets and defied court orders, the entire concept of financial accountability would take an even bigger hit. What kind of message does it send if someone can commit fraud, lose in court, and then just ignore the consequences because they're politically powerful? This situation shines a massive spotlight on equal justice under law. At the heart of the issue is whether Trump can just defy court orders and hide assets whenever he feels like it. If he gets away with that, it could totally change how our legal system operates. The whole point of civil judgments is that they can be enforced. When someone loses a fraud case, they pay the damages. When they appeal, they post a bond to protect the other party while the appeal proceeds. These aren't arbitrary rules designed to persecute anyone. They're the basic mechanisms that make our legal system function. They apply to everyone, from the poorest defendant to the wealthiest CEO. The system was designed this way, specifically to prevent the powerful from using endless appeals and delay tactics to avoid consequences indefinitely. But Trump has always been uncomfortable with those limitations. He craves total control and special treatment. If this asset freeze gets overturned based on his claims of persecution, that's a significant boost to the idea that political figures can opt out of legal accountability, and it opens the door for future leaders to misuse that precedent. So the implications of this case reach far beyond just Trump and New York. It's about shaping the structure of American accountability for many years to come. Each time Trump brushes aside norms, breaks laws, or attacks institutions enforcing those laws, it weakens our democratic systems. It starts making behavior that used to be completely unacceptable feel normal. Think about it. If Trump can commit massive fraud, get convicted, and then just refuse to pay while hiding assets, what's to stop the next wealthy defendant from doing the same? If he can defy court orders whenever he claims political persecution, what's to prevent another political figure from following that lead? These actions don't just disappear when Trump leaves the public stage. They become precedent. They become part of our new reality. And that's pretty dangerous. Democracy relies on the principle that laws apply equally, assuming that people in power will ultimately comply with court rulings even when it's inconvenient or embarrassing, or when that assumption crumbles. When powerful people can simply ignore judgments they don't like, democracy itself starts to falter. Looking ahead to the 2024 elections, it's clear that all of this is going to have some significant effects. We're still 11 months out from those elections, but the narrative being set now is bound to influence how things go. If the story playing out is one of Trump battling every institution, losing in court, and watching his empire crumble while he claims victimhood, That spells trouble for Republicans trying to win suburban voters and independents. Voters usually don't reward chaos and dysfunction. They want stability and competence. Right now, Trump isn't offering either of those. So expect Democrats to champion a message focused on restoring normalcy and accountability. After years of chaos under Trump, there are folks who believe that if you vote against MAGA candidates, our institutions will actually start working again. They're promising no more constant constitutional crises or battles with judges, banks, and prosecutors, just good old normal governance where people actually face consequences when they break the law. That message might just hit home for a lot of voters, including some moderate Republicans who are exhausted by the constant drama and embarrassment. So here's the deal. Donald Trump's private jet is grounded. His assets are frozen globally. And Warren Buffett just called it the most predictable financial collapse he's ever seen. This isn't just about one man's legal bills anymore. It's about whether we genuinely have a system where everyone plays by the same rules, or if we're stuck in a world where the wealthy and powerful can defy court orders indefinitely as long as they claim persecution. If Trump succeeds in avoiding this judgment through delay tactics and asset hiding, then we're basically saying financial fraud doesn't matter anymore. Civil court judgments are optional, and consequences only apply to regular people. That would mean we're stepping into a completely new realm where wealth and political power create a permanent shield against accountability. It's about so much more than just $500 million. It's about whether we genuinely have equal justice under law, or if we're just stuck with a two-tiered system where rules bend for whoever can afford enough lawyers and generate enough outrage. So keep an eye on this. Things are just heating up. That grounded jet is just the beginning. The next few weeks are going to be crucial as courts decide whether to maintain the freeze, as prosecutors potentially consider criminal charges for contempt, and as Trump's financial house of cards either stabilizes or completely collapses. The stakes have never been higher, the evidence stronger, and the outcome more unpredictable. This is the moment when we find out if our institutions can still enforce basic accountability when tested by someone who spent his entire life avoiding